When I started chasing my author dream, I genuinely believed that my passion and work ethic were going to be all I needed to break through and achieve my dream of getting paid to practice the craft. But I was wrong. I was in denial about this for a while, so I kept cranking out story after story, series after series, waiting in vain for the readers and the royalty checks to roll in. But after I published my magnum opus, the story that I had been called to write since I was 16, and 9 people said they really loved it. I realized that what I didn't know about crafting books that connect with people actually was hurting me. So I got humble and I stopped pretending that I knew better than the authors who were a few steps ahead, and I decided to start taking their advice. My very next series led to my first 10K month as an indie author, which is pretty wild since my skills didn't change overnight. My self belief didn't change. All I got was a little bit of strategic insight. And now it's time to pass that strategic insight on to you so that the 11 months I spent riding the struggle bus on the way to self-publishing success actually comes to some good. So let's get into it. Here are 3 things that I wish somebody would have told me before I wrote my first novel. Now, when I tell you this first one, you have to promise not to panic because it's going to sound a little bit harsh. But if you can just sit with the discomfort for a second while I explain, you are going to put yourself ahead of 99.9% of authors who can't bear to look at this. Here's the first thing nobody tells you. If you build it, they will not come. Now, I did not want to face this reality. I wanted to believe with all my heart that if I built it, they would come. But the trouble with this is when you rely on that blind faith, you have to muscle your way through your manuscript from a totally uninformed place. Now, you might also be thinking, I knew it. I suspected that if I built it, they wouldn't just come. And it's been keeping you from sitting down and starting to work on your book because you know how much heart and soul you're going to have to pour into this thing, and you don't want it to be in vain. So I'm going to suggest a better path that is going to make writing your first novel and marketing it so much easier. So when I said, if you build it, they won't come, what I mean is if you build it, they will continue to go where they already go to buy books, which is the bookstore. And the thing about the bookstore is it doesn't exist to serve authors. The bookstore exists to serve readers. So, when a new author publishes a novel on Amazon, Amazon isn't thinking, oh, great, let's give this debut novelist a chance. Let's push their book out in front of everybody. That's not how it works, right? Amazon and any other bookstore is thinking, let's push the books that people are going to buy today. So if your dream is to have a book that readers can find without you having to throw it down on the sidewalk in front of them, you have to learn how to use the bookstore to your advantage. Here's how that works. Before you ever write a word, you ask yourself this question: what section of the bookstore do I want my finished book to belong in? The beauty of this question is it's not only going to shed a ton of light on what should go in your book to make it belong in that section, but also it's going to answer 100 questions about what absolutely should not be in your book. Like, should there be zombies? Already answered. Should you swear in it? Already answered. And if this question feels a little bit tricky or not quite sure, ask yourself what authors you want to share a shelf with. Because the reality is your readers already exist. And there are already authors who are entertaining them. The beauty of starting with this question is that success leaves clues. And you can go on Amazon and look at the product pages for the books that you want your book to ultimately share a shelf with. And you can look for patterns. What are readers loving? What are readers loathing? What do the covers of these books look like? If you are going to bake a cake for the first time, you wouldn't just wing it because you've been eating cake all your life. If you actually wanted it to be a tasty, delicious cake, you would look at some other recipes and see what kind of ingredients they had in common, and you would use that information to make your cake better. That's exactly the same thing here. Is you look for patterns, and the information you find allows you to strengthen and develop and refine your story before you ever even write it. Not only does doing this groundwork give you a ton of information that can help you write a first novel that is actually really satisfying to read, but it changes the writing process. So when you sit down to write, something that happens to a lot of authors is their inner critic starts acting up and, asking lots of questions like, is anyone going to really like this? Are you sure about this? And that can really be draining when you're trying to craft something that's captivating from cover to cover. But if your inner critic starts asking you questions like that and saying, are you sure about that? Is anyone going to like this? I mean, who's going to read this really? And you can just stop and address your inner critic and say, actually, I do know who's going to like this. And I know why they're going to like it. And I know where they're going to find it when I'm done. Well, it kind of quiets your inner critic a little bit. And this makes the writing process so much more enjoyable because you can use your creativity to actually string sparkling sentences together instead of using it to quiet your inner critic. The second thing that I wish somebody would have told me before I wrote and published my first novel, because it would have relieved so much pressure from the process, is this. Readers are not looking for the most original story of all time. They are not typing into the Amazon search bar books that cannot be categorized or described. Here's what they're looking for: fresh takes on the familiar themes, tropes, and stories they enjoy. It's just a fact. If this weren't the truth, there wouldn't be thousands of fairy tale retellings. There would be no need for a Jack Reacher or a Jason Bourne because Bond would have had it covered. And there would have been no need for the Divergent series because, the Hunger Games would have been enough. But the first people who bought the Divergent series were the people who loved the Hunger Games. And the powers that be understand this not just about your readers, but about you and me. When Amazon recommends a book to you, it's based on the books you've already bought. And when Spotify sneaks a new song onto a playlist of yours, it's because it kind of sounds like other songs that you've already binge listened to. And Netflix doesn't look at your viewing history and then recommend something in a totally different genre. It says, hey, we suspect you're going to like this because you've liked all these other things. Life is short, and readers are spoiled for choice, and they want to read things they know they're going to like. So don't put so much pressure on yourself to reinvent the wheel that you end up making something that doesn't roll. Of course, you want your story to be original. And the issue is that when you're just looking at your ideas in the cold light of day before you flesh them out into a story, and they're all just staring back at you from a piece of paper, sometimes they don't feel very original. But that's because you can't see the part of your story that will be original, which is you. You are the fresh take on the familiar themes they enjoy. You are the one who pours in the unique voice and perspective and characters. I mean, if we both sat down to write a story about a boy with special powers, we'd write two totally different stories. We couldn't write the same story if we tried. Take the most predictable story of all time. Let's say you wanted to tell the story of a game of chess. It's a story about a war. There will be sacrifice and plot twists, and a kingdom will fall. I mean, exactly how it has to end. And yet, after 3 moves, there are 121 million ways the story of a game of chess could go. And after that, it becomes incalculable. But it's not because the characters are different or they move differently. It's because of the human element. It's because of the player who's playing the game. You are the original part, and the originality of your ideas is revealed in the execution of them. So don't squander your creativity trying to come up with the most original ideas that have ever been conceived by man. Instead, If you have some ideas that are proven winners that readers love, let that be a green light and use your creativity to execute on those ideas to the best of your ability, because readers never tire of good stories well told. I hope this relieves some of the pressure you feel to come up with original ideas, because you don't need pressure to write a page turner. You need to realize that you are in self-imposed art class and you are at play. And the more fun you have telling your story, the more fun your reader is going to have reading it. The third thing I wish someone told me before I wrote my first novel, because it would have helped me write a much better book and have a lot more fun doing it, is the idea that constraints are your friend. I used to think that constraints were the opposite of creativity, that to be and feel creative, you needed to feel as if you were without limitation. But the truth is that constraints actually unleash creativity because they allow you to channel your creativity in productive ways. For example, say I had an artist studio in my backyard and I sent you out there and I said, you're going to find every size canvas that you can imagine, every color you can imagine, every type of medium that you could paint with. Go out there, take a few hours and make something wonderful. You would be totally overwhelmed. The chances of you creating an epic masterpiece would be very small. But if I said, hey, go out there, I left you a small canvas on the easel and 3 shades of blue and a white, and come back in a half hour, let's see what you got up to, you would have a very good chance of bringing something back that was actually pleasing to look at. And musicians know this, right? That's why they say 3 chords and the truth. If you try to use all the chords, you're not focused on the truth, and the truth is what makes great art. This is also true when you're writing. You want to impose constraints so that you can focus on what really matters. So what kind of constraints is it worth thinking about before you write your first novel? Well, one is genre, for example. We already talked about that. If you're clear on what section of the bookstore you want your finished book to live in, it tells you a lot about what you should include in your book and what you shouldn't include in your book right away. Another constraint you absolutely want to think about before you write a word is your word count. How long do you want your book to be? Because knowing this acts as a sort of GPS. How can you write a well-structured novel with a clear beginning, middle, and end if you have no idea the first 60,000 words, whether you're in the beginning, middle, or end? You have to know how long you want your book to be to impose a structure that makes the reading experience satisfying. Another constraint you want to consider is how many characters do you really need to tell the story that you want to tell? Because it's fun to make up new characters, but when it comes to characters, less is more. Readers are craving depth and intimacy with your characters. I mean, if you want them to feel like they went to a big party and didn't really get to know anybody, that's a totally different reading experience than wanting them to actually feel so connected to a small cast that the people are as real to them as they are to you. I go into a lot more depth about this in my course for authors, which I will link to in the description below, because this is so important. And I teach something called the Tigger test. And I call it the Tigger test because if you think about Winnie the Pooh and all his friends, they all have a unique function in his life. They all reveal Pooh's character in a unique way. And if you added another Tigger and he had 2 friends who were Tigger, it wouldn't amplify the power of Tigger in his life. It would actually dilute it. As Tigger says in his song, the most wonderful thing about Tiggers is I'm the only one. And so when you're considering whether you should add another character to your novel, you want to ask yourself, does this character pass the Tigger test? Are they performing a unique function in the story? Are they revealing the protagonist character in a way that only they can? And if they are, then they pass. But if they don't, whatever it is you're thinking about adding this character for, you want to give that responsibility to a character that already exists so that that character can become more well drawn, have more depth, be more complex, because That complexity is going to make it easier for your reader to connect to that character. So let's recap what this all has to do with your first novel and setting yourself up for success so you know what to do first, second, and not at all. Do not make the mistake of thinking you need wildly original ideas to write an entertaining, engaging story that feels fresh and that readers will love. Do not make the mistake of thinking you need to craft your first novel in a vacuum. There are already authors who are entertaining your future superfans, and success leaves clues. Use those clues to develop and strengthen and refine your ideas and to quiet your inner critic. And do not make the mistake of thinking constraints will limit your creativity when constraints are actually an asset that will amplify your aptitude for storytelling. If you avoid these 3 mistakes, you will write a better book faster and have more fun doing it. More importantly, readers are far more likely to find, feel, and finish your book in your lifetime. You have the skills and self-belief you need to craft an incredible book. All that's left to do now is take these strategic insights and go write the incredible story that only you can tell.